The Entrepreneurial Journey Podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey Podcast. Today I have Emily Tsitrian with me. Hello, Emily. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It's good to meet you and it's great to be here.
Good, thank you. And you're in a rather rainy Chicago.
It is. We're in the last bit of Chicago's very famous for very cold winters, and so we're in the last little stretch here. So hoping some sun is right around the corner.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed, definitely. So I've come across you because you have a book, and it's quite an interesting book. Probably a bit like you, I've read millions of leadership and business growth books and all kinds of things. And what you did was read them and went, hang on a minute, there's nothing there for somebody like me. So, Make Me the Boss is the title of your book. Tell me about how it came about and what was missing from the other books.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote the book as I was observing a really big shift in the workplace, particularly with members of my fellow millennial generation coming into people manager roles for the first time and really struggling to adapt to a different mindset of going from being an individual contributor to being a people leader. And I think a lot of millennials don't necessarily resonate with the kind of standard advice that's been given for many decades. And so I wanted to write a book that I felt really met my peers where we're at. We're a very unique generation. We communicate in a unique way. We have a different set of values, a different set of kind of cultural and business leaders that we look up to. So I wanted to write a book that was really unique to millennials and kind of meets the moment where we're at.
Okay, so you were sort of climbing the greasy pole, climbing up the career ladder in a tech business, which must have been very exciting. And at what age and stage did you find yourself in a leadership role?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm cracking up at the greasy pole because can feel that in my body, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it's like sometimes. So my own personal journey into management happened at a startup, which I think is quite common nowadays, where people are joining pretty early stage companies and very suddenly becoming responsible for an entire department or for hiring people or coaching people. And so that's exactly what happened to me. I happened to be an early employee at a 20-person startup that all of a sudden got this funding, and I was basically tasked with creating a team and figuring out how to scale the department that I was in charge of. So I was very much thrown into it without a lot of training or guidance or coaching, and that's how it is. So I learned a lot of things really the hard way. And after a couple of years, I thought, all right, I've got this now, which is, a lie. None of us ever, I think, really master it. But I did observe so many people going through a very similar journey and making a lot of the exact same mistakes that I was making. And I think, ultimately what happened is a friend called me one day. And as millennials, we don't really like to get phone calls. It's kind of uncomfortable for us. So, but I took the call and she asked me, she had just gotten a promotion to manager. She was so excited and asked me if I had any books I would recommend. And I realized I should probably write that book because I think the book you need doesn't exist. And so I'm going to write it. And that was sort of the genesis of it. Yeah.
Oh, good for you. What kind of mistakes did you make, Emily? Come on, fess up.
Gosh. So I made, I think, the classic mistake of trying to be the cool boss right away and trying to think, you know what, I can do this better than all of the other people that have gone through this. And I'm going to lean into the fact that I can really, really relate to my team. And so I really struggled to kind of, realize I had to, that's not actually what they needed at the time. And then I think another classic mistake that I certainly did is I got into a position of leadership and I really ran myself into burnout thinking I was going to solve all of these problems that, the team had been complaining about and I had observed. And I had this newfound power and I was going to go break down walls and, make big company wide change happen that, we all kind of at the water cooler talked about needed to happen. And I think 3 months into it, I was just exhausted. So not really pacing myself and also not necessarily creating a lot of the right alliances across the company in order to be effective because I was so full of energy and wanted to change everything all at once.
Okay, that sounds exhausting just listening to you, to be honest. Yeah,
Yeah.
that. So, in this startup, were you of a similar age to the original founders?
I was actually. So
Uh-huh.
I was probably about 26 or 27, and I think the founders were around 30,
Okay.
which is pretty common in like the tech and Silicon Valley world. But I have later learned that the average age of a first time people manager is 30, which checks out.
Yeah.
It's someone
Yeah.
who's got 5 or 6 years of experience and is kind of making that pivot. But it does also happen to be exactly, the millennial who's coming into these first time roles. So there's many millions of us in a very similar situation across the world.
Yeah. I had never even thought about it that you would be of a similar age to your boss, as it were. Because, of course, when I came into the workplace, our bosses were a good, probably 10 years older than us. So at least there was a bit of a gap.
Mm.
But yeah, with a very small gap. So how was it managing upwards, and what kind of things did you find that were tricky, difficult about managing upwards?
Yeah, so managing up is it's a tough skill to
Yeah.
gain. And I think once you go into middle management, it's very different than managing your manager as an individual contributor because you're kind of balancing the needs of you're representing the needs of the team to your boss, but you're also representing your individual needs as an employee and as just a human looking for a certain type of career path. So I think many first time managers forget that they also need to manage their own personal career in addition to kind of like representing and pushing for the success of the team and their direct reports. I've gotten quite a lot better of it over the years, but certainly have not mastered it. And I think this will probably be relevant to your audience since I have actually recently co-founded a company and become a CEO in and of myself.
Ooh,
So,
well
um,
done.
so that's very exciting. And it's the first time I've personally not had a boss,
Okay.
which is strange and a little uncomfortable in some ways, but I do surround myself with a lot of advisors that bring a lot of wisdom to me and hold myself accountable to them in a lot of the same ways. So that's been a bit of an adjustment.
Yeah, I was at a networking event this morning. We were saying, the value of a really good board is just huge when you're running your own business. Yeah, that sort of sensible, level-headed person who just has a quiet word with you when you're having the meltdown is invaluable. That's great.
And I think there's a lot of lessons from that, even going back into the corporate world. So, having a personal board of directors for your career that's outside of your direct management chain and maybe some of your immediate peers in the department, I think it's really invaluable and not something that I think a lot of first time managers are going to necessarily think to prioritize, but can be an incredible investment.
Yeah, I think that's really sensible advice. Often, first time managers sort of have an accidental advisor, but actually purposefully having, key people around you for a specific purpose as you grow and develop. I think that's a great idea. I don't think we have mentors in the UK, but I don't think that's necessarily formalized here. Is that something that's more common in the US, do you think?
I think it is. In the US, we're pretty aggressive networkers. I think that's a
Oh,
little bit.
we're just too polite.
So that could be it. Could be the American spirit is
Yes.
just can't stop kind of
Yeah.
doing that. But yeah, I found that to be true.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So tell me about your new business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I most recently worked at a very large payments technology company called Stripe that I'm guessing a lot of the listeners have probably heard of if they're
Well,
using Stripe's.
we're huge fans. We use it.
Oh, well, there you go. Excellent. Yeah, so it's very, very innovative API based payments technology that's really, really good for entrepreneurs to get off the ground. And so I have actually created a payments consulting company that's specifically focused on Stripe, but other payments providers as well. So we work with businesses to help them stand up their payments integration for the first time. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's a really great idea. Yeah, because it's a minefield. And you sort of, well, certainly for us, we've come across it by accident. We have no idea what else might be out there. So yeah, that's a really good idea actually. So who's in your business? Is it just you or have you got a team?
So I have a co-founder who is also an ex-Stripe employee, and then we have one leading integration engineer, quite technical role.
Okay.
So it's just the three of us for now, but we do plan to grow pretty steadily over the next few months as we're learning. Lots of demand, lots of need for businesses to learn how to set up payments. It's kind of something you don't necessarily want to think about. You want to think about running your business, so our value proposition is like leave the heavy lifting to us. We'll kind of get you set up and set up for scale as well. You don't want to have to like rip out your payments technology every time you hit a certain development milestone. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, what a great idea. Okay, so back to the book. Where can people get hold of the book?
Yes. So I the book is listed on all the major booksellers. I would be remiss to not encourage folks to order a copy from your local bookstore. I think
Yes.
the world is much better if we have local independent booksellers. So would encourage you to order from your local bookseller's catalog, or happy to make a recommendation for a few if your listeners don't know any, but it's also available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the kind of major resellers as well.
Good, good. And what was the process like of writing it? Because lots of people go, "Oh my God, you've written a book." Did it come easily to you, or did you struggle?
I found it excruciating. I wish
So honest, thank you.
I wish I could say that I enjoyed it. I enjoy having done it,
Okay.
but the process was really painful. And I think I a lot of people will take a sabbatical or something like that to write a book. I was living it and then I was writing about it every day. And so I did the bulk of the writing during the COVID pandemic when we were all kind of under quarantine. And I figured, oh, great time to write a book. But we were dealing with some really, really hard stuff in the workplace. I mean, the economy was weird. I mean, it's weird now, but it was really weird then. Everybody's personal life was completely upended, whether it was, they were having health issues related to COVID, or they had to cancel a wedding, or they're worried about their grandparents. It was just like every single person's life was in a weird, kind of scary spot. And yet we still had to kind of manage and keep the business running and keep things moving forward through this crisis. And so I was doing that and leading a team and being a people manager, and some days not being very great at it. And then coming home going to my living room because we were still home and thinking, all right, great. Now I'm going to write a chapter about how to not do the exact the thing I literally just did. So it was pretty vulnerable to be like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to literally reflect on what I didn't do well today and write about that. And then some days it was the opposite, right? I'd be like, oh, I had a great one-on-one. I'm gonna write down some things. But the actual writing of it I found to be really tedious, but incredibly fulfilling. I think at the end to look back and say, wow, I did it. I wrote a book. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge achievement. Absolutely. I that That's a really nice insight into the way you've written it, because so many books on leadership are obviously filled full of hindsight, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. But to hear that you wrote it in the moment, um, it is incredible, and you're right, demonstrates quite a lot of vulnerability. Um, I haven't read the book because I only got it on Tuesday and you booked in for today, so I haven't had time to read it. But do you talk about vulnerability and things like that in the book?
Oh, absolutely. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I think that's one thing that is really different about the workplace and the generation that's coming into the workplace is there's a demand for vulnerability and authenticity. And Gen Z is coming in like a wrecking ball into the workplace, for better or for worse. I mean, I think for better. I think they're fantastic, but there is a very high expectation that their management team is walking the walk
Oh,
and
yeah.
is open and talking about our feelings in the workplace and talking about our backgrounds. And so that is absolutely just what is going to be the norm and what is expected. And it's ultimately going to be, I think, how we'll get the best performance out of our teams if we're showing up as our best selves. And a lot of days that means being honest about where we're at and showing kind of our vulnerability and what makes us human.
I completely agree. I love Gen Zs. I have three of my own. Who have two have just entered the workplace. One's 25, one's 22. And I see it in them. They ask for things and talk to their managers in a way that I would never have dreamt of talking to my managers. And their expectations of how a leader ought to perform and, as you rightly say, walk the talk is just, I mean, it's how it should be, actually. But it's nothing, when I was in early days in the workplace in the early 90s, I mean, you just didn't ever talk to your manager like that. You were quite scared. So it's very liberating and slightly terrifying for those leaders out there.
It really is. It's they say this about every generation. I think Gen X, the Boomers, they're all wild and rebellious, but I do think there is something special about Gen Z coming into the workplace in the world that we're in and facing things like climate change and systematic racism and thinking about, wow, do I really want to spend the next 40 years of my career working for a company or a leader that's not in alignment with my values? And I just think that is a question that's going to be asked of today's modern leaders. And I think as millennial managers, it sort of starts with us
Yeah.
as kind of that first layer of management in the company.
Do you think millennial managers are, as they age, because how old would a millennial manager be these days, just for our listeners, so they've got a range?
Yeah, it would sort of be like late 20s to almost like your early 40s. Like we're
Yeah,
definitely starting to age a bit.
yeah,
But yeah, it's kind of the generation that really kind of came of age in like the early 2000s.
yeah.
We're kind of bookmarked. Our youth is kind of bookmarked between like 9/11 and then the COVID pandemic. So
Oh, really? Okay, those are the
yeah,
bookends. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, do you think the older ones are getting slightly more cynical as they age? Does it happen to every generation? I genuinely don't know.
I will say from personal experience, and the data that I'm seeing is that there that is not actually happening.
Okay.
Millennials are optimistic, tired, but still optimistic. And we still continue to bring a lot of energy into workplaces and we're still have a lot of demographic trends that are very different than other generations. We're really delaying childbirth. We're living with roommates longer. We're not maybe saving as much as other generations and cohorts. And so we're still kind of puzzling demographers is like, how is this all going to settle? But I do think that millennials still have a lot of spunk, a lot of energy. Just I think that's why I think we're having a hard time adjusting to these people management positions, because it's strange to all of a sudden have some power, have some money, have some influence. And so how do you kind of keep the core of who you are, but also adjust your life and your the way that you work in a way that honors this responsibility and this power that we have as we move into these leadership positions.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's yeah, I had never even thought of that. That you sort of, as a generation, you were accustomed to perhaps not having a huge amount of money, like you say, continuing to share later in life, share accommodation, and then suddenly to have your own place and maybe to start a family. Yeah, that would probably mess with your head a little bit, I would think.
Yeah, and as a generation, I think that we were really pioneers in kind of unpacking some of our mental health, talking about gender and things like that, and in a more public way. And I think Gen Z really respects that and sees that we've paved a lot of that pathway, and so I think we're in a good position to now just incorporate that into this is just how we work now. We respect each other. We understand boundaries. We do work on ourselves, and we take care of our mental wellness as well as just our physical wellness as well.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good. Yeah, when I started work, I was working in a very male dominated engineering business in Yorkshire in England, and our British listeners will understand what that means completely. And they still had calendars with topless women on them up on the wall in the office. So my pioneering spirit at the tender age of 22 was to get those removed from the walls. And I was universally disliked for it, but that was the change that I brought to it. And it's really nice that your generation and Gen Z are very much going, no, look, we're all in this together. There's no boundaries here. There's equality, and we need to treat each other with respect. It doesn't matter what the background is, race, color, creed, nobody cares. It's your ability to deliver on the job that people care. And that's very refreshing.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that anecdote with me. That is, it's surprising to even think that would be the case so recently.
Oh, yeah.
But
Oh, I can
yeah,
tell you some horror stories.
oh gosh, I bet you could. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I was told we were doing a big presentation to a load of people, and I was told that I wasn't allowed to do it because I was a woman. And was like, oh, okay, well, that seems highly unreasonable, but anyway, there we
Wow.
go.
Wow. Well, there you go. Yeah, that is fascinating. Oh my goodness.
So, what's coming next? If you have your crystal ball, what do our future leaders need to look out for and be aware of? Do you think what's on the horizon?
Yeah. So when I kind of take a step back and look at the pace of innovation and change that's happening in a very aggregate sense in the world, I don't think any of us can predict the future exactly, but it does seem like we're on the precipice of another tectonic shift in technology in terms of AI.
Yeah.
So when I look back at like the past 15 years, but let's go further back,
Okay.
past 30 years, like the big wave was cloud computing, that changed everything. Then the next really big wave was like mobile phones and proliferation, and social media kind of happened around that same time where everybody's on social media now and everyone's got, this computer in their pocket. It's changed everything.
Yeah.
I think we're on the next big shift, which is going to be AI. And we can already sort of see how, whoa, this is going to change a lot or could really change a lot. And so I don't think any of us really know what the jobs of the future look like. And I think it would be really disingenuous to say, hey, this career path that has existed and worked really well for the past, 30 years or even 10 years is going to be another path to success. So for us to, as leaders, give our direct reports or people coming to the workplace really tactical career advice, I think that is silly. Like, we don't know what jobs will be, but I think we can absolutely say the types of character, the leadership capabilities, and I think the sort of networking, like the classic, branding yourself, networking, building a lot of different types of skill sets that will endure, and
Yeah.
put people in the absolute best position to take advantage of this next big cycle that we're in. And so I would really lean on that, and I would give that advice to leaders as they're looking to really invest in their team's ability to, ride this next wave.
I completely agree. Ironically, I'm taking my youngest daughter to a careers evening this evening, which is hilarious because you're quite right. Some of those jobs won't exist, and the jobs that she ends up doing haven't been invented yet. 20 years ago, who knew you could be a digital marketing manager? You know, there
Right?
were no social media managers 20 years ago. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. I think one of the key attributes, because I train leaders too, is that behavioral flexibility, that ability to really adapt and change their thinking as the landscape shifts. Because you're right, we don't know what's coming next. It is going incredibly fast. And I think the only preparation that we can do is to just practice behavioral flexibility or flexibility in our thinking, um, and look up and out. I think it's really, I don't know what it was like at Stripe, whether, it ended up being so big that it looked very inward or whether it still looks outward. But one of the things I do see in big organizations is they're so busy looking inside, they forget to look what's going on. What advice do you give to leaders about that aspect of an ever changing world?
Oh, absolutely. I think that is a bit of an Achilles heel with organizations as they get to a certain size. It does become kind of self-obsessed and misses maybe what's going on. I will say at Stripe, my experience is that it was very unique in that they were building for what they thought was is the future 15 years from
Uh-huh.
now, not the next year, not the next 5 years. What is our 15-year vision? What
Yeah.
do payments look like 15 years from now? How would you buy a cup of coffee in 15 years?
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of unique about Stripe. But in terms of, sort of how can leaders avoid that? I think it's got to be so intentional. And to your point about behaviors, it is one of those things where it's like, hey, if you're not kind of spending 30 minutes a day, maybe a couple hours a week, actively networking, reading The Economist,
Mm.
listening to podcasts such as yours about just what are trends outside of my immediate worldview, you're actively like not growing in the way that you need to, and you're actually causing risk to your company by not expanding your horizons as a leader. And I give the same advice to people managers as well, where it's like, if you're not spending kind of 10 to 15% of your time on developing yourself, your team's going to outpace you and you're
Yeah,
not going to be the leader they need in a year.
totally.
So you just have to really actively do it, even if it feels like everything's on fire in front of you.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
tough.
And I would add an extension to that and say, look, as a people manager and leader, go off and learn something completely unrelated to your job. Listen to weird and wonder how great are podcasts, by the way. They've transformed everything, haven't they?
Yes. Yes. Another example of who would have thought a podcast, would be such a thing. But yeah, it's been an incredible way for people to consume content.
Yeah, and the things that you can learn from people outside of your field, I think you can completely then take those back to your business. It absolutely. In fact, I would go as far as to say, Emily, and you can disagree with me on this, go out and purposefully investigate things that have absolutely nothing to do with your business. because those are the things that will give you the insights and the inspiration to take back to your business. Yeah. So the stressed out people manager, okay. The stressed out millennial people manager, they're juggling so many plates in the air at once. What's your top tip? What's the big takeaway for them that you can give them right now?
Yeah, if you are, it's never going to feel like things are like you've made it or like all the plates are no longer actively being juggled. That is the job, right? And if you're not feeling, I think, at least a little bit of discomfort, you're probably not pushing yourself enough.
Okay.
So I think that is part of it, and the job is to be constantly learning and taking those lessons back, as you've so beautifully stated. In addition to the reasons that you've stated for, challenging yourself to learn things and expose yourself to things outside of your kind of, narrow worldview, I think it also just makes you a more interesting person, and people like to work for interesting people that have other things going on in their life, and you could talk to them about something other than the actual job. So just like,
That's true.
you gotta have other interesting things going on. But I think in terms of this concept of work-life balance, it's entirely, it's unrealistic. I think of it more in terms of like, don't let any one thing in your life fall. So you cannot be constantly holding every single aspect in your life in a perfect balance all the time. It's not realistic. But if you're kind of taking stake at what's going on in my personal world, my work world, my own personal career growth, is there any area of my life that's like about to actually hit the floor?
Okay.
Go for that thing. Don't let it hit the
Yeah.
floor. And so you're going to be kind of like having some weeks where, I'm putting my career on the back burner for a couple of days because I've got some family obligations. Or, hey, I've been spending lots of time with my family. Oh, there's a big problem at work. Okay, I'm going to, not talk to my kids for a little bit because I just can't. Or, there's going to be some times where I'm going to have to tell my family, like, there's a really big work emergency. And that's okay.
Mhm.
And so I think in particular as women, we have just an unrealistic expectation that we can manage all of those things all at the same time. And so I think
Mm.
it's just, it's like Pilates. If you have to hold your arms out for 10 minutes, you can't do that. You got to
Yeah.
kind of like go back and forth a little bit. So give yourself some grace and know that that is just like literally what the job is. So you're probably doing great.
Yeah, I agree. I think people are so hard on themselves, aren't they, to achieve this and achieve that and to be perfect this and perfect that, that actually, if you're getting it about 80% right in about 80% of your life, you're probably doing okay. And to just, yeah, it's sort of give yourself credit for what you have done and are doing. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, your new business. This is my final question, Emily. If your new business had a character or a personality, how would you describe it?
Ooh, I'm thinking it's a little bit of like an alley cat.
Ooh.
Yeah, yeah. Like, kinda like a little bit underestimated,
Okay.
looking for some opportunity, like, very aware of its surroundings and kinda thinking of some strategic ways to, take advantage of some situations. So, intriguing and certainly one to watch.
Oh, I like that. We've not had an alley cat before. We've had lots of other sort of analogies with the animals and things like that, but never an alley cat. So thank you very much. So, final shout out for the book, Make Me the Boss. I love the title of that. Available at your local bookstores. Please go and order it. And if you can't get to a local bookstore, then go to one of those slightly well-known platforms where you can buy anything that we won't mention because everybody knows them. Best of luck with the new business. Best of luck with the book, Emily. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was really a joy chatting with you.
The Entrepreneurial Journey Podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have